The car wasn't just a car. It was the last thing my husband left me. A 1970 Ford Thunderbird. Deep blue with cream leather seats, smelling like old summers and Sunday drives. Every scratch on the steering wheel carried a memory. Every dent told a story. After he passed away, that car became my ritual. Every Saturday morning, I would walk into the garage, dust the hood, polish the chrome, and whisper, "You're still shining for him. Aren't you my daughter?" Julia never understood that. She thought I was clinging to the past. Like a fool trapped in yesterday. She was 35. Independent. Working in marketing downtown Denver. Pretty. Confident. And lately, always rushing. One morning, she came by with her latte in hand. Heels clicking against the floor like little hammers on my nerves. She leaned on the garage doorway, watching me wipe the windshield. "Mom, that car is a museum piece," she said, smiling like she was doing me a favor. "Why don't we sell it? You never drive it anyway." I laughed softly. "Sell it? That car has more miles of love than your phone battery could ever handle." Julia rolled her eyes. "It's just sitting there collecting dust. Dad wouldn't want you stuck in the past." Her words hit like a cold breeze. I straightened up and looked her in the eye. "Your father loved this car. It was the first thing he ever bought after marrying me. He used to call it his lucky charm." She sighed. Impatient. "Mom, times are different. You don't need a car like that. It's worth something. You could use the money to travel or fix the roof." I smiled, but my heart felt heavy. "Julia, some things aren't meant to be priced." She gave up that morning. But something in her tone made me uneasy. That quiet confidence of someone who has already made a decision. A week later, I went to visit an old friend, Eleanor, who lives 2 blocks away. We had coffee, talked about her grandkids, and spent the afternoon reminiscing about the old days. When I came home, I noticed the silence first. The garage door was open, sunlight spilling into an empty space. My heart stopped. The car was gone. I dropped the grocery bag. Oranges rolling across the floor. My hands trembled as I called Julia. She picked up after the second ring. Cheerful. "Hey, Mom. What's up? Where's the car?" The line went quiet for a second. Then she said, "Oh, I had it sent to the repair shop. It needed work." Remember, something in her voice felt off. Too smooth. Too ready. "Julia." "Which shop?" She hesitated. "The one on Elm Street." "I think." "Don't worry. I'll handle it." After she hung up, I stood there in the quiet garage, staring at the empty floor. The car keys were gone from the hook. I felt like someone had taken a piece of my husband from me. That night I didn't sleep. My mind replayed every conversation. Every small moment I had with Julia. The next morning, I called the mechanic on Elm Street. "Hey. It's Margaret Lane. Did my daughter Julia bring in my Thunderbird yesterday?" "Thunderbird? No. Ma'am. Haven't seen one of those in years." I hung up. The blood drained from my face. When Julia came over that evening, she was wearing a new jacket and red lipstick, looking like she was heading to a party. She greeted me with a bright, fake smile. "How's my favorite mom?" I didn't answer. "Where's the car?" "Julia," her smile flickered. "I told you. It's at the shop." I called the shop. "It's not there." She froze for a second, then sighed, putting her purse down. "Fine. You deserve the truth. I sold it." It felt like the room tilted. "You what?" I sold it. "Mom. I needed the money. It was just sitting there. I'll get you another one. Maybe something newer." I stared at her. For what? Julia looked away, tucking her hair behind her ear. "For some debts. It's no big deal. I'll pay you back." "No big deal. That car was your father's life. You didn't just sell metal." Julia, you sold his memory. She groaned like a teenager being scolded. Mom, don't be dramatic. It's just a car. I felt something crack inside me. I walked to the garage window and looked out at the empty driveway. When your father died, I promised him I'd take care of what he loved. And that included you. I turned back to her. But you've made it hard to remember why. Julia's eyes filled with tears. But not the kind that come from guilt. They were the frustrated, defensive kind. I'm sorry. Okay, I'll make it right. I'll pay you back. You can't pay back what you took. Julia. She grabbed her purse and stormed toward the door. I was trying to help you. Mom, you're the one stuck in the past. The door slammed. Silence followed. I stood in that empty garage for a long time. The smell of motor oil still lingered, mixed with dust and betrayal. My hands traced the outline of the space where the car once stood. I could almost see my husband there, leaning on the hood, smiling at me. For the first time in years, I felt old, not because of my age, but because of the emptiness of being unseen, unheard, unvalued. I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the kitchen window. Outside, the evening sun dipped behind the houses, casting long shadows across the street. The phone buzzed. A text from Julia. I'll bring you some money next week. Don't be mad. I put the phone down. I wasn't mad. I was past mad, because anger fades, but disappointment, that stays. And somewhere, deep down, a small, cold part of me whispered that this time, I wouldn't let it slide. She had sold my memories for money. But soon, she would learn that some debts aren't paid in cash. The morning after Julia sold the car, the house felt quieter than it had in years. I sat by the window with my coffee, watching a lone magpie pick at the grass. The empty space in the driveway stared back at me, almost taunting. I used to joke that my husband's Thunderbird had a soul. Now, it felt like mine had gone with it. Julia didn't call for 3 days. When she finally did, her voice was light, rehearsed, almost cheerful. Hey, Mom. Just checking in. You okay? I said I was fine. What I wanted to say was that she had broken something she couldn't fix. But mothers learn early that silence can speak louder than anger. A week later, she showed up unannounced, carrying takeout and a bottle of wine. Look, I got us Chinese. Let's not stay mad forever. Okay, I looked at her, noticing the gold bracelet on her wrist. New, I said. Smells good. Set the table. She smiled, relieved, and started unpacking the boxes. We ate quietly for a while before she spoke. I really am sorry about the car. Mom, it's just, things have been tight lately. I nodded, waiting. Her voice softened. There was a credit card thing. Some late bills. Nothing serious. I just panicked. I sipped my tea. You didn't ask me. She looked down. You'd have said no. That's what asking is for. Julia, to find out if someone loves you enough to help. Her eyes glistened, but she quickly wiped them. Let's just move forward. Okay. After dinner, she left early, saying she had work in the morning. I watched her car disappear down the street, wondering how my own daughter could look so calm after selling a piece of our family history. The next day, I went to the post office to mail a package. While waiting in line, I overheard a conversation behind me. 2 women talking about a charity auction for vintage cars. I turned slightly when one said, "Someone bought a beautiful old Thunderbird last week." I smiled, trying not to react, but my heart thudded. When I got home, I opened my laptop and searched for Denver vintage car auctions. After half an hour of clicking and scrolling, there it was. A photo of my husband's car. Same license plate. Sold for $13,000. My breath caught in my throat. That evening, Julia called again. Chatting about work, I listened. Quiet. And then asked, "How's your boss these days?" She hesitated for just a second. "He's fine." "Why?" "No reason," I said, just making conversation. After we hung up, something about her tone stayed with me. Too soft. Too casual. A few days later, I stopped by Julia's office downtown to drop off some homemade cookies. I had done that before, back when she used to brag about her sweet old mom. But this time, the receptionist looked surprised to see me. "She's not in today," she said. "She left for lunch with Mr. Carter." Mr. Carter was her boss. Married. Twice her age. I thanked the receptionist and walked out slowly. Outside. I sat in my car for a long while, the winter air heavy with the smell of exhaust and betrayal. That night, I called Eleanor, my neighbor and oldest friend. She used to be a judge. Sharp as a needle and twice as stubborn. I told her everything. The car. The auction. And now this. Eleanor didn't gasp or pity me. She just said, "You can forgive a thief, Margaret, but betrayal from your own child, that cuts deep." I sighed. "She's my daughter, Ellie. I raised her better than remind her." Eleanor said, "Remind her who she is before the world does it for you." Her words stayed with me all night. The next morning, I went through Julia's old things in the attic. Boxes of photos, report cards, love notes she'd written as a teenager. I found her wedding invitation. Her smiling face beside her husband's. The police officer she'd once called her hero. I wondered what he'd say if he knew about her lunch dates with her boss. I didn't want to ruin her life. I wanted her to see herself the way I saw her now, through the cracked mirror she'd made. Later that week, Julia came over again, pretending nothing had happened. She walked through the door with a designer bag and perfume strong enough to fill the kitchen. "Mom, look. I got a raise." She laughed, tossing her hair back. "Mr. Carter said I've been his most valuable employee." I watched her carefully. "You must be very close with him." She froze for half a second. "We work well together." "That's all." I smiled. "That's good. It's nice to have someone who appreciates you." She laughed nervously. "Yeah." We sat at the table, and she scrolled through her phone while I poured tea. When her phone buzzed, she jumped. I glanced down and saw the preview of a message before she flipped it over. "Can't stop thinking about you." Her face went pale. I kept my voice steady. "You seem distracted." "Honey. No. Just tired." I nodded. "Maybe get some rest." When she left, I stood at the window, watching her drive away. My heart hurt. Not just for the car, but for the little girl who used to hold my hand crossing the street, who used to write me cards that said, "Mom, you're my hero." That night I couldn't sleep. Around midnight, I went to the kitchen, made tea, and opened my journal. I wrote every detail down. The car, the lies, the messages, the lunches. Not out of revenge, out of clarity. A week later, Julia called, her voice bright again. "Mom, great news. Mr. Carter invited me to a weekend retreat with the team. We'll be at a cabin near the lake. His wife's out of town." She said it without realizing what she'd admitted. I felt something inside me harden. "Be careful, Julia," I said softly. "The higher you climb on lies, the harder the fall." She laughed it off. "Mom, please. It's just work." When the call ended, I sat there, in the dim kitchen light, tracing the rim of my mug. The house creaked with the wind, and the silence grew heavy. I looked up at the spot on the wall where my husband's picture hung. His steady smile met mine. He used to say that truth has a way of driving itself home. No matter how long the road, maybe he was right. And maybe it was time to let it drive. The morning came cold and still. The kind of Colorado winter morning where even the air feels quiet. I woke up before sunrise, unable to shake the heaviness in my chest. Julia hadn't called in days. I knew she was still at that retreat with her boss. And I knew his wife had found out. Eleanor came by that afternoon, coat buttoned to her chin, holding 2 cups of coffee. She didn't waste time. You've been sitting in this house thinking too long. Margaret, what's your plan? I stared at the steam rising from my cup. I don't want to ruin her. Ellie. She's still my daughter. Eleanor sat down across from me, her voice gentle but firm. You're not ruining her. You're letting the truth do its job. That evening, the phone rang. Julia's voice was strained, her tone all wrong. Mom, can I come over? An hour later, she stood in my doorway, mascara smudged, her face pale. He told his wife, she said, her voice cracking. She called me. She's threatening to tell the whole company. I guided her inside, poured her tea, and waited. She started pacing. I can't lose my job. Mom, you don't understand, I said quietly. I understand more than you think. She stopped, looking at me like she finally saw something behind my calm. What does that mean? I took a breath. I saw the messages. Julia, I know about you and Mr. Carter. Her face drained of color. You went through my phone. No, I said. You left your heart in the open. And it fell into my lap. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then her expression hardened. You have no right to judge me. You're not perfect. I nodded. No, I'm not. But I never traded my integrity for attention. She turned away, arms folded. You think you're so righteous. You've always had everything together. You don't know what it's like to be under pressure, to feel trapped. Her voice cracked on the last word. And that's when I saw the fear behind her anger. The same fear I once had when I was her age. Desperate to prove I could handle life on my own, I stood and placed my hand on her shoulder. I know more than you think, Julia. But what hurts me most isn't what you did. It's that you lied. You lied to me. And you lied to yourself. She pulled away, wiping tears roughly. So what now? You going to tell everyone? Destroy my career? I looked at her, really looked, and felt the anger leave me like air from a balloon. No. Sweetheart, I don't need to. The truth already did. She sank into a chair, covering her face. Mom, I've made such a mess. I sat beside her. Then clean it up. But start with yourself, not the world. We sat in silence, the clock ticking softly between us. She cried for a while, then finally whispered, I'm sorry about the car. I smiled faintly. I know. A week passed. She didn't call. But I knew she was trying to fix things. I heard from Eleanor that Mr. Carter had resigned. His wife filed for divorce, and the company quietly replaced Julia's department head. Julia kept her job but moved to another branch. It wasn't grace. It was mercy. One morning, a package arrived. A small box with a note in Julia's handwriting. Mom, I can't bring the car back, but maybe this can fill the space. Inside was a framed photo of my husband standing next to the Thunderbird, sunlight catching his grin. Beneath it, a simple line written in marker. You kept his promise for both of us. I sat at the kitchen table, tears sliding silently down my face. I hadn't realized how long I'd been waiting for her to understand. That weekend, Julia came by again. No makeup, no perfume, just her. She helped me sort boxes in the attic, folding old clothes, labeling photo albums. For the first time in years, we worked side by side without tension. At one point, she held up a faded picture of herself as a child, sitting in her father's lap behind the wheel of the car. She smiled weakly. I forgot how much he loved that thing. I nodded. He said it made him feel free. She looked at me. Maybe that's what I've been chasing. I smiled. Then stop running from yourself. When she left that evening, the house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt clean. Like something heavy had been lifted. A month later, I started volunteering at the community center, helping young women with job training. It felt right. Giving advice I wished someone had given Julia. One afternoon, Julia stopped by during class with sandwiches and coffee. She waited quietly until I was done, then told me she'd started seeing a therapist, trying to rebuild her marriage. Her husband had agreed to talk. I didn't say much. Just hugged her. Some things are better said through forgiveness than words. That night, I took out my journal and wrote one sentence. I lost a car, but found the road back to my daughter. The wind outside rustled through the trees, soft and steady. I poured myself tea, sat by the window, and looked at the driveway. It was still empty, but somehow, it didn't hurt anymore. I realized then that revenge isn't always about making someone pay. Sometimes it's about letting the truth do the work while you move on. If someone has ever betrayed your trust, don't let bitterness drive your story. Sit quietly, hold your dignity, and let the truth steer its own course. Because no matter how long the road, it always finds its way home.